We started off flying low level. The Air Force always used to fly low level, and basically it was a cost thing. The American forces could afford to fly in huge formations with fighters, with dedicated ECM aircraft, dedicated all sorts of aircraft that would take out missiles, so they could afford to fly at medium level. We didn't have the money to pay for all these extra aircraft to defend us, so low level was our best bet. We used to fly at low level, below the radar. They couldn't see us. The fighters would find it very difficult to get to us at low level. But after, I think it was about 4 or 5 days of the war, we'd lost a couple of aircraft, and we got together with the Americans and said, look, we'll fly as part of your formation, so you can give us the protection that we need at medium level, and and we can do the job of taking out the targets. And that's exactly what happened. And for quite a lot of the war, it was I wouldn't say a benign environment. The most dangerous thing was AAA. You could, particularly at night, you'd see it. Over Baghdad, there was a huge dome of AAA, and of course it was only the bits, AAA, about 1 in every 10 bullets, they have a tracer, which is a sort of a magnesium bullet, which is on fire, and so they can see where the bullets are going. You could only see the magnesium ones, and there were a lot of them. And you have to imagine for every one of those, there were 10 real bullets. And you just had to, eventually, when you got towards your target, basically grit your teeth and go into that bubble and keep your fingers crossed, because there was very little you could do about that. The guys on the ground, I think, were basically, they weren't aiming, they were just pointing the guns up in the air and spraying bullets around. The aircraft has got twin cannons, 27mm Mausers, but we also had recce aircraft. There were 2 variants of the Tornado at the time. There was this one, which is the strike attack, and there was a reconnaissance one. The reconnaissance one didn't have any cannons on, but it was designed for photo reconnaissance. They used to fly around alone and unafraid, and it's not a job I'd have liked to have done.
Especially at night too, they would fly some of those at
Yes,
night.
oh, all at night. Wow. Yeah, because the jet wasn't particularly designed for photo reconnaissance, it was radar reconnaissance, and they could get incredible radar pictures at night. Yeah.
Yeah, too, right?
Oh yes. Well, the clean aircraft was rated at Mach 2.2, but you will see under here that thing there, which is it's a laser rangefinder. So when we were dropping bombs, we could actually laser the target, and it would give us an exact distance to the target. Once that went on, it was limited to Mach 1.3. The palm trees are for the numbers of sorties the aircraft, or the number of war sorties the aircraft flew, and the bombs, I assume, are the bomb loads. And they're all showing 5,000 pounders. We started flying with 8,000 pounders, but we found we had to use burner to get round corners at medium level with that weight on. So we went down to 5,000 pounders. And then later, when we got designators, we were carrying the paveway bombs. We carried less of those. I'm not sure of the exact origin. I know who painted it. It was a guy called Corky who was on my foreship, and he did several, and one of the ground crew as well. And you've got photographs of all the ones I'd got pictures of. So this is the intake. There's a big flap in there that went down to restrict the airflow. So one of the problems with jet engines is that when you go supersonic, the air inside the engine goes supersonic, and that causes lots of problems. So they restrict the airflow to keep it subsonic in the engine. These here were to allow extra air in when you were stationary on the ground and the engines were running. Undercarriage under there.
What goes through your mind when you see your old bird, one that you flew on?
Well, memories.
Did you all listen to music on it?
We could do. To put missions into the aircraft, we used a normal C90 cassette, and that was always a very tense moment, because you spend a lot of time preparing this cassette, and sometimes they didn't work. If they didn't work, you had to type the whole lot in. And you had to type it in on a keyboard which had, I think it had 9 keys. So you had to keep changing it for whether you wanted letters or numbers, and it was a nightmare. It was just what you didn't want. When they upgraded the aircraft, you got an EEPROM that did it, which was much more reliable. But the advantage of the cassette was you could take music cassettes and listen to them when you were flying.
What would be some of these little gauges here? These are kind of fun.
These were hydraulic gauges. Yeah, they were just hydraulic gauges. Check the hydraulics. Before you flew, you always did a walk around.
Can you show me some of the gas tank too?
Yeah, these are what we call big jugs, because I think they were 2,000 litres, if I remember rightly. In UK, we normally flew with slightly smaller ones, but these arrived a couple of days after we arrived in the Gulf, and they weren't particularly trialled for high speed, but we did the trials ourselves on them. Two of the unique features of the Tornado were, firstly, variable wing sweep. You had 3 positions on the wing, 25, which is just a slight sweep, and that was for low speed flying, landing and taking off. You had 45, which was normal cruise wing, and if you wanted to go supersonic, it went right back till it was almost like one triangular wing along here. The other unique feature is, because of the variable geometry, it had no ailerons. So there's no ailerons on the aircraft at all. You've got spoilers on the wing, which gave you some roll control, but you also had the tailplane, and the tailplane could move like that to give you roll control. And it was a triplex fly-by-wire, but if that all failed, you had what was called mech mode, which basically was just the tailplane. You got no rudder control, no control of the controls on the main wing, and you could still fly the aircraft with that control.
This is pretty tricky compared to some of the other aircraft you flew?
No, it was very easy, very comfortable.
Very responsive. Was it pretty
yeah.
responsive? You asked it to do something.
Oh yes, I mean, before I was on Buccaneers, and that was a lovely aircraft. But the Tornado, you could take your helmet off and speak to each other, whereas in a Buccaneer you needed your helmet off to stop going deaf because it was so noisy. These were the bits for the afterburner. When the afterburner was on, these sort of opened out, and not particularly a unique feature, but some of it's missing actually. It's got that's the tail hook, so you could take a cable if you wanted. But it was a one-shot thing. You could put it down, unlike the Buccaneer, which was a Navy aircraft, you could put the hook down and pull it back up again. On a Tornado, it just sprung down, and once it was down, it stayed down. So if you made a mistake and put it down, you had to try and land beyond the cable so you didn't take it. It also caused problems with the airframe. I think if you took the cable about half a dozen times, you'd have to go on and have stress checks and things, which the engineers didn't like. Very important for carrier aircraft, but the Tornado wasn't designed as a carrier aircraft. That was just there as an emergency thing. That's the runway denial weapon that we no longer use. It's not politically correct, because the whole thing was filled with. There were some rockets that went down and penetrated into a runway, and runways are quite easy to repair. If you make a hole in a runway, they can fill it in very quickly. But what these did, they went down into the ground and then exploded. And instead of creating a hole, they created a hump. And a hump's much more difficult to get rid of than a hole. You fill holes in, you've got to clear. And also what it did, it used to put mines down. And these mines, if you were trying to clear them, they're very clever. They had a spring device on, looked like a spider. And if you tried to clear them with a scoop on a bulldozer, they would automatically turn towards the bulldozer and fire a shaped charge off which would take the bulldozer out. And some went off at random intervals up to 48 hours, I think it was. And that's why we had to stop using it, because it was deemed to be too dangerous. At the top of the fin, if you see, there's two protrusions with little radar heads on, and that's the aircraft have the capability of listening to enemy radar, both in your audio and on a little CRT screen. And so, if a missile tried to lock onto you, it would warn you about it. You'd be able to identify by the noise which missile it was. You could see where it was coming from, and then you'd use the countermeasures to knock it out. But most of the time, after the first few days, it was a very benign environment, because you Americans went out with your HARM missiles, and every time they switched to radar on, the radar head was taken out, and they started firing SAM-2s visually. It's all that happened basically. We'd see smoke trails and just stay away from them, but not very accurate.
You lost about 5 of these, right?
I think 6 altogether we lost. I don't know whether they counted. We lost one from Dhahran before the war started. Again, it was a young lad with a young navigator, and they were flying in Oman, practicing low-level flying over the desert, and they just flew into the ground.
What is it like to be here at this museum and see all these other planes, and then we have this amazing story from Desert Storm that you took a huge role in?
It's really interesting, but the thing that ages me a little bit is nearly all the aircraft that I flew are now in museums.
That's great. That's a great comment.
And my good lady as well. She, when I first met her, she was a stewardess on an airline, and one of the aircraft she flew is at Duxford now.